Salvi's Search for the Universe. Chapter 11. Part 1.
So slow!
Salvi hollered back from her perch atop a root at the crest of the nearly vertical climb.
Well, excuse me for being a cripple.
Branilkov struggled awkwardly up the roots, dirt packed behind them as they snaked in and out like nature's stepladders.
Maybe we should break one of your legs and see how you like it. But, leg not broken. Oh, shut up.
He snapped in between ragged breaths. He stabbed his walking stick into the dirt and labored his way up, root by root. He almost lost balance 7 times. It didn't help that Salvi was staring down at him from the top, with her hands on her knees and that vague expression on her face. He neared the top, flung his elbows over the final shelf, and tried to hoist himself up with all his might. He strained and struggled until Salvi gave what meager help she could offer. He got his leg over the ledge. Physical activity was never his speciality, and neither did it help that he was feeling a little under the weather. He tried to catch his breath, but Salvi was already walking ahead. He shuffled ahead on his stick and tried his best to keep pace. They had been travelling like this for 3 days. So far they had been living of dried deer meat, but without salt or ice, it would not last forever. It was trees, rocks and trees. If he never saw another forest until he died, it would be fine by him. He didn't know much about forest survival, but since they had fallen off a cliff, it seemed obvious to travel upwards until they ran into a path. The road from Luhorn to Einkirk cut through the whole forest, so they were bound to hit it sooner or later. Unless they were heading in the complete opposite direction. Who knows what was out there? He tried not to think about it. Holes had begun to form in his dapper shoes. They were not poorly made. It was simply that they were never intended to be used as hiking shoes. His big toe stuck out from the sole. He stepped on a stray thorn, leapt in shock, and fell flat on his arse as his bummed leg buckled under the sudden body weight. Salvi stopped and gave him an unreadable expression that might have been amusement or concern. He wasn't very good at reading the countenance of kobolds. Never got a chance to study it in school, you see. He shot her an annoyed glance anyway. That was just how his mood was right now. It seemed as good a time as any to take a break. So he grabbed his lute, plucked out some of the clay that had been used to plug the holes, and took a drink from the lukewarm, slightly muddy river water. It was just what he needed. If there was one good thing he could say about being lost in a dense forest, it would be that it was at least shady. He looked up and saw all the golden light shimmering between the leaves, appreciating all the sunlight that wasn't hitting him. Salvi wasn't very good for conversation, so at a lack of anything better to do as he rested, he looked around some more, even though it was all the same kind of green, planty forest he had been looking at for hours. And...
wait. That tree?
He worked himself onto his feet and pointed.
We've already passed it before. You're leading us in circles.
Salvi looked, but wasn't one to pay attention to such bland things, such as landmarks, and just shrugged.
How no? That knot in the trunk looks like my grandfather. There couldn't be another one like it for thousands of miles.
She looked again, and even she had to admit it kind of looked like an old human face, all gnarled and wrinkly like that.
Oh, that does it. I've had enough of you leading me around because you can walk a little faster than me. We're going my way this time.
He hobbled ahead as fast as he could and managed to pass her by, counting on without even checking to see if she was following. She did follow, but was clearly upset with being forced to walk so slow. Whenever they rested, she seemed to silently resent the fact that he had a nerve to sleep at night instead of walking until he physically collapsed. Sleeping with her around was no small task either. She seemed to require only half as much sleep as any human, and her time awake was either spent pacing around in circles like an excited dog, trying to burn off excess energy, or attempting to strike up random conversations, regardless of whether or not he was asleep. Still, it was better than being alone. He had to admit he would probably be dead by now if not for the scaly creature. He looked over his shoulder and saw that vacuous, yet vaguely upbeat expression she always wore. It was distracted at some kind of insect fluttering by. She snapped at it and swallowed. Well, he couldn't quite see her as an equal, but he could at least rank her above your average peasant. At least she didn't threaten him with physical violence whenever he tried to play his music. They hiked upwards as much as the terrain would allow, Branelkoff slashing through the thick vegetation and dropping forest creepers with his free hand, wishing his dagger was longer. Salvi was usually uncaring of what was in her way and just let it scrape over her body and whip behind her. The hours went by, and the heat turned from sweltering to tolerably humid. Branelkoff struggled up another rocky climb. He grabbed the top of the ledge and hoisted himself into the air, his good leg pumping and scraping against the loamy rock face. His eyes widened in surprise as Salvi put her hands on his behind and pushed as hard as she could. He grunted. His head crested the ledge. His legs soon followed, and he rolled over the top. He panted, looked back, and saw Salvi scale the slope effortlessly. It really annoyed him how good she was at climbing. He was getting tired. He considered calling it here for a day. Now that he was leading, he had pushed himself to move a little too fast, and it was starting to catch up to him. His breath was hard, and kind of felt like throwing up. Salvi looked at him, cocked her head, and he was suddenly filled with the urge to prove whatever that look meant wrong. He worked himself up, strode ahead as confidently as one could manage with a bummed leg, and stopped, frozen.
"What?"
he said to himself.
"What?"
He shouted out loud, staring aghast at the old, gnarled tree before him, its distinctive trunk sporting the visage of an aged man. He whipped his head side to side, as if he could find the imp responsible for this prank.
But...
He looked more and more. It looked all too familiar.
That's impossible!
There was no doubt about it. It was the same tree they have already passed. Salvi sniggered behind her hand.
"Human badger Salvi!"
His brain was malfunctioning.
It's impossible! It doesn't make any sense! We've done nothing but climb upwards for hours! How could we possibly end up back here?
Salvi shrugged and seemed altogether unconcerned. For her, getting lost and accidentally walking in circles was so bland it hardly warranted a response. Branelkoff made an expression like he had just bitten into the world's worst sour lemon.
Well, let's not go overreacting. It's not like we're hopelessly lost or anything. Yes, it's just a grand adventure, isn't it? We're both just having so much fun. Salvi, think, little fun.
Branelkoff threw up his free hand and limped away in a huff. Salvi looked surprised.
Branelkoff mad?
She hollered after him.
Where human going?
She jogged away and caught up with him, which wasn't very hard. He was clearly annoyed. They didn't speak at all. He ignored the easier paths in favor for the brush and shrubs. It scratched his skin and tattered his already shredded clothes, but he'd be damned if he'd end up back at that tree. He was tired. His body felt heavy, and every breath he took felt like it was burning his lungs, and despite the heat, he felt very, very cold. Fog was rolling in around them. It spilled in through the trees and coated the forest floor in a thin, yet thick layer of white. He climbed up another ledge and was already half expecting it, but fell to his knees and yelled to the heavens anyway. It had only taken 30 minutes to find its way back, this time.
Oh, I give up.
He slumped at the base of the tree. He looked like he wouldn't be moving even to duck a charging bull.
Why Branelkoff stop?
Salvi asked.
Because we're going to die, and I'd rather not be sweaty and gasping for air when I meet God. It would leave a bad impression, you see.
He wanted to complete the sardonic remark with a smirk, but he couldn't be bothered.
We not die?
Salvi said, but it wasn't to comfort him so much as it was a plain observation that they were not going to die in the immediate future.
Right.
He waved his hand.
I'm the only one who's going to die. You'll just be fine. Just eat some rocks and sticks, and you'll be fresh as a daisy. Might as well just leave me here.
He flopped to the floor and stared up at the forest canopy. Salvi eyed him suspiciously.
This when humans say one thing, but mean other? No.
He flapped his hand.
I give up. I'm done. Do be a dear and tell them where to find my body, though. I may not have been the best son, but I'd like my parents to at least know how I died.
Salvi looked at him funny, but didn't protest otherwise. The fog was thick now, and the sun was invisible, though they knew it had to be up there somewhere. It was eerie, dark and bleak. Salvi stepped ahead and looked back, making sure he was serious about being serious. He didn't move. She took another step.
Wait.
He breathed. She looked back. He looked hollow, as if possessed.
What is that beautiful noise?
He sat up, his head bobbing and swaying as if following the path of an invisible moth, fluttering circles around his head. Salvi strained her ears to listen. Through the trees and in the valley, murmurs of muted music filtered through, buzzing as if every blade of grass resonated with noise. It was not pleasant. In fact, it was harsh and horrifying. It sounded like something Branelkoff had composed, but elevated to an entire orchestra. It did not enter her ears like normal sound, but thrummed through her body like an endless electric charge. The whole forest thrummed. Branelkoff rose to his feet, his walking stick falling from his side, and walked, eyes fixed on the distance. Salvi wasn't sure what to think. She looked confused. The noise got louder. Every part of her wanted to shut it out. It was overwhelming. The world closed around her, and something took hold. She tried to plug her ears, but her arms were as foreign as dead flesh. She walked forward, stiff as a board, one leg after another, like a mechanical doll. The noises were harsh, but she had to admit she was curious as to what was making them. She fell in beside Branelkoff, and the music grew louder, louder, louder.